Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Morenike, but you can call me Rennie. And in this video, I'm going to be continuing the series that I started on understanding the foundation of the Christian faith. If you haven't watched the first video, then I'll suggest that you go and watch that even right before this so that you can understand the full context. But to give if you're new here, to give you context to what I'm doing, I'm basically doing a Bible study that is explaining the events around Jesus' death, his burial, and his resurrection, and what those events mean and how they apply to people, to even non-believers and to believers. Like in the previous video, I'm going to be reading some scriptures. I'm going to put it up on the screen as well as I'm reading, but I'll be looking at my phone down, so in case you see me looking down, and then we'll read a text, and then I'll explain, and then just go into explaining what all of these events mean. So if you're interested in all of this, definitely keep watching. If you're new here, I just wanted to remind you to subscribe to my channel. I talk about all things Jesus on this channel. We're going to grow in your knowledge of Jesus, and understand how to read the Bible properly by seeing it through the lens of Jesus, how to read the Bible contextually, and just everything that is going to help you to grow in your faith. This is a channel that is not going to be surfacey and just talk about surface level things. I'm going to be going deep into the word and really digging into scriptures and seeing what each of these scriptures mean and how they apply to us. But let's get right into the video. Okay, so I'm going to be starting at, so we're reading Mark 15 towards the end of the chapter in the Message version, and I'm going to be starting from after. So where we ended in the last video was verse 34, Mark 15 verse 34, where Jesus was saying, my God, why have you abandoned me? And then verse 37 to 39 is where we're going to start from. And so it says, but Jesus with a loud cry gave his last breath. At that moment, the temple curtain ripped right down the middle. When the Roman captain standing guard in front of him saw that he had quit breathing, he said, this has to be the Son of God. So I'm going to stop there, and we're going to look through, what is here for a little bit. But before that, I also want to read another version of this account. So what I was reading was the version in Mark. I'm going to also read the version in Matthew 27 in New King James Version. It's verse 51 of Matthew 27. It says, from verse 50, and Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So we're going to look at the significance of all of these events one by one. But I'm going to start with what he said, that as soon as Jesus gave up his last breath, he said at that moment the temple curtain ripped right down the middle. And what this means is, in the temple in those days, there was a curtain that was separating the people, general public, from the place where it's called the holies of holies, where the presence of God dwelt. It was only the high priest, the high priest is someone that represents the people to God. He's the only one that could go past that curtain to present sacrifices and be in that presence of God. There was always that veil that was separating the people from God. But in this moment where Jesus died, that temple curtain was torn from top to bottom. And what does this mean? It basically means that we now have direct access to God. So like I said, in those days in the Old Testament, it was that the priest was the one that was the mediator between God and man. They didn't have direct access to God, and I explained why, because of sin in the previous video. But so there was that separation between God and man. But now that Jesus has come and taken our place and died and given us his righteousness, there is nothing that is separating, God and man anymore. And so the temple curtain being torn is signifying that there is nothing that is separating us anymore from God, and we now have direct access to the Father because of Jesus. And there was something that my pastor pointed out, which I just found really interesting about this story, was that they actually said that it was turned from top to bottom. So if you're thinking about a curtain now, and normal, if a human being is going to tear a curtain, they're going to tear it from bottom to the top, because that's where we stand from the bottom to the top. But it says here that the curtain was torn from top to bottom. So it was basically God saying, I'm the one that is tearing it, because basically that God is from the top. He's the one tearing down the curtain, the one that is giving us that access to himself. He's the one that initiated it. It wasn't us. We didn't do anything to receive this access to God. It was God that did everything by himself. And so he's the one that tore that curtain from top to bottom so that we can have direct access to him. And so that's one of the main things that I got from this, is that we now have direct access. So you don't need a pastor to be able to get access to God, or to hear from God, or to get direction from God, or to receive from God. You don't need a prophet to tell you what God is saying. Even though there's a place for pastors and a place for prophets in the body of Christ, all for edifying and encouraging and lifting up the body of Christ, which is all of us believers. So there's a place for that, but it is not that they are a mediator. They're not a mediator. They're not the one that stands between God and man, for God and us. The next thing that I found interesting was, which is why I also read that second verse in the other accounts, because different accounts, some accounts might miss out some things, and so another account might give another scenario or event that happened within that time period, so that we can get the full picture. So in Matthew that I read, in Matthew 27 that I read, it said after the temple, the veil, the curtain was torn from top to bottom, it says the earth quaked and the rocks were split and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So who do they mean by many of the body of saints? So in the Old Testament, we have all of these, heroes of our faith. There's Abraham, there's Moses, there's Isaac, there's Jacob, there's David, there's Esther. All of these people, the Bible is basically saying that it was at this time that Jesus died that they all too were basically raised from the grave. And he said all who had fallen asleep had raised, and coming out of the grave after his resurrection, they went into the city, that people even saw them. And so what does this mean? This actually means that you cannot get to heaven without Jesus. In that all of these people, even as good and everything, all the things that they did, they obeyed God, they believed in the promise of Jesus to come and all of these things, they couldn't get to heaven without Jesus, meaning that they had died, right? But it was a falling asleep. And so when Jesus was raised, that is when they were now able to go to heaven, because you can't have heaven without Jesus. Jesus is the one that brought heaven down to us. There is no heaven without Jesus. And I hope that makes sense. This basically proves it, that even though they had all of these things, they couldn't go to heaven because Jesus had not yet come to die for them. They also needed to receive Jesus in their hearts for all of them to be able to go up to heaven, with Jesus. It's one of the things that basically proves that what we're saying is that Jesus is the only way to the Father. He says he's the way, the truth, and the life. And so all of these people, no matter how the good that they did and all of that, they still couldn't get to heaven without Jesus. They needed Jesus to be able to get to heaven. And so in this account, it's saying that people, they literally appeared to people in the city during that time that Jesus died, because he was taking them with him to go to the Father. There was something that my pastor said. It was that for them it was heaven at last, But for us, because Jesus has come already and we see and we have Jesus inside of us when we believe in him, it is heaven at first. So Jesus comes to live inside of us, which means heaven is already inside of us. So it's heaven at first. It's not, we're not waiting to get to heaven. Heaven has already come down to us and lives inside of us, and we experience heaven on earth. So that's really where we are. But I just wanted to point that out because it's one of those things that basically proves what Jesus says, that no one can come to the Father except through me. So I'm going to continue reading through that verse. We'll go a bit further down of the event after Jesus was died and how he was buried, and then we'll explain that. So from verse 40 to 41, this is still Mark 15 in the Message version. 40 to 41, it says, there were women watching from a distance, among them Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of the younger James, and I don't know if this is Joseph or probably Moses, Mary the mother of younger James, and whatever his pronunciation is, and Salome. When Jesus was in Galilee, these women followed and served him and had come up with him to Jerusalem. So verse 42 to 45, it says, late in the afternoon, since it was the day of preparation, that is Sabbath Eve, Joseph of Arimathea, a highly respected member of the Jewish council, came. He was one who lived expectantly, on the lookout for the kingdom of God. Working up his courage, he went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate questioned whether he could be dead that soon and called for the captain to verify that he was really dead. Assured by the captain, he gave Joseph the corpse. Then he said, 46 to 47 says, having already purchased a linen shroud, Joseph took Jesus down, wrapped him in the shroud, which is like a linen cloth, placed him in a tomb that had been cut into the rock, and rolled a large stone across the opening. Mary Magdalene and Mary, mother of Moses, watched the burial. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out in this story that I noticed was the Bible is divinely inspired. I said that in my last video. A lot of people feel that the Bible is just, you can't really trust it because a bunch of people, over different years wrote it, and, you can't trust it and all of that. But the truth is that even though the Bible was written over several thousands of years, by at least 40 authors, they were all divinely inspired by God. And how do we know this? For one instance is that Jesus' death, burial, and even resurrection was prophesied in the Old Testament hundreds of years before they actually came to fruition, and he fulfilled every single one of those prophecies. And I'm going to be listing out a bunch of them. And so his burial was fulfilled in Isaiah's prophecy. So in the book of Isaiah was a prophet in the Old Testament. His prophecy of Jesus' burial was 700 years before Jesus actually died and was buried. And Jesus fulfilled the exact prophecy that Isaiah wrote 700 years before. And what did Isaiah say? In Isaiah 53 verse 9, it says, and they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. So they said they made his grave with the wicked and with the rich at his death. So his grave with the wicked, it wasn't written in this Mark's account, but in the account of Jesus' death, where he was crucified on the cross, there were two thieves on either side of him. So he was in the middle and two thieves. So that's why it says he made his grave with the wicked. Then it now said, and he was with the rich at his death. So in this story that we read, it says Joseph of Arimathea, a highly respected member of the Jewish council, came, and he was the one that took Jesus' body down. Joseph of Arimathea was a rich man. He wasn't just, and he was a disciple, but from afar, a disciple of Jesus, but from afar. And it's not someone that everyone knew that was a disciple. And it was really interesting to me because I'm like, Jesus had so many disciples. He had 12 disciples, right? And none of them that were closest to him, not even Peter, could go and take down his body. It was Joseph of Arimathea, this rich man, that could take down his body. And he said, when he took down the corpse, he said he wrapped him in linen shroud and placed him in a tomb that had been cut into a rock. So apparently back in those days, a tomb that's been cut into a rock, especially a new tomb, was very expensive. So it's only the rich that could actually afford that type of tomb, which means that all the other tombs that were in that place were rich people. And so that, fulfills the prophecy that, but with the rich at his death. But I'll move on quickly from that. For examples, it says that in Psalm 22 verse 16 that the Messiah would have his hands and feet pierced. They'll be pierced through, and that's exactly what happened when he was nailed to the cross. His hands and his feet were pierced through. Also in Psalm 22 verse 17, it said that the Messiah's bones will not be broken, and it really wasn't broken. So let me explain. In the account in John, we will see that Jesus gave up his spirit right after he said, my God, why are you forsaking me, and all of that. He gave up his spirit and he died. In the way things worked at that time, it was that even after people were crucified, they didn't die immediately. So they always had to break the person's leg to quicken up the death process. And Jesus just died on his own. That's to show that they didn't actually kill Jesus. Jesus gave up his spirit. And I love, because the Bible actually says that he gave up his spirit, because they can't take Jesus' life except he gives them access. So it wasn't that they killed him. He gave up his spirit, because normally he's not supposed to have already died at that moment. That's why when Joseph of Arimathea went to go and ask for Jesus' body, it said that they were shocked, and whether they didn't believe that he had actually died, because it was too soon for him to die. And so because they saw that Jesus had already died, there wasn't any need for them to break his legs anymore, like they broke the legs of the other thieves on the cross. So yeah, this also fulfilled that prophecy. Then Psalm 22 verse 18 said that men will cast lots for the Messiah's clothing, and that's exactly what happened as well. In the account of in Matthew 27 verse 35, it actually says that they cast lots. That's basically like they divided up his clothes, and then basically we're like betting on who's going to get his clothes, his outfits, and that also was fulfilled. So it is very important to note this, because it makes you understand the legitimacy of the Bible, the legitimacy of these words, to know that scripture is God-breathed. It's not just written by man, it was divinely inspired by God. It was God's hand that was on all of these writers throughout all these years. So I just thought it was important to mention that. So the next thing I want to point out was, so after they took Jesus and put him in the tomb, it says that they rolled the stone over the tomb. And that stuck out to me, because the stone usually represents the law. The law, I mean, like commandments, 10 commandments, and all of these rules and regulations. Because, so how do I know? So the 10 commandments were written on stone, right? So when you see stones a lot of times in the Bible, it can want to signify the law, right? All of these rules and regulations. And so it says he rolled the stone over the tomb, and Jesus was in that tomb. And to me, it was basically like as if like when the Bible says that Jesus was satisfying the requirements of the law. So what we couldn't do by ourselves in being able to perfectly obey the law and keep the law, Jesus did everything for us. He fulfilled the law and took our place. And it's like maybe we want to write an exam, and so Jesus came and wrote the exam for us, passed it with flying colors, and then now gives us the benefit or the certificate from that exam, gives us that score, right? And so Jesus, as he rolled the tomb away, was that Jesus was basically satisfying every single requirement of the law that God gave, right? So that he could give it to us. I'm going to go a bit further and read into his resurrection, right? So this is Mark 16 now, still in Message version. It says, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so they could embalm him. Very early on Sunday morning, as the sun rose, they went to the tomb. They worried out loud to each other, who will roll back the stone from the tomb for us? Verse 45, it says, then they looked up, saw that it had been rolled back. It was a huge stone, and walked right in. So the stone was rolled away. They saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed all in white. They were completely taken aback, astonished. He said, "Don't be afraid. I know you're looking for Jesus the Nazarene, the one they nailed on the cross. He has been raised up. He is here no longer. You can see it for yourself that the place is empty. Now, on your way, tell his disciples and Peter that he's going on ahead of you to Galilee. You'll see him there exactly as he said." Okay. So it says they got off as fast as they could, beside themselves, their heads swimming. Stunned, they said nothing to anyone. So, well, the place I want us to emphasize right now is when they said they looked up and saw that the stone had been rolled back. The stone had been rolled away. So, like I was explaining before, it was that the stone was rolled to cover the tomb and Jesus was locked in, where he basically was satisfying the requirements of the law. And now the stone was rolled away, meaning that as Jesus has satisfied the requirements of the law, the stone, which is the law, is rolled away. Is that we are now free from the law. We are now free from the condemnation of the law, free from the requirements of the law, and from this, relationship, this rule obeying, just rule following thing that the people of the Old Testament had with Jesus, where it was just about following rules and regulations. But right now, because Jesus has fulfilled that, we are not just following rules and regulations. We now have a relationship with God. I'm going to read Romans 7 verse 1 to 4. I really love the way it explained it, and how we're not just freed from the law, we are now married to Christ.